Over the course of this and the next two movies, we'll take on a more complicated project, so you can get a feel for the sort of whole-scale modifications you can make using the liquefy filter. I'll also be working dangerously by applying liquefy as a static effect. If you're working along with me, feel free to apply liquefy as a dynamic smart filter. I just want to give you a sense for the static workflow. So in the case of this image, we have a good-looking young woman. And yet, it couldn't be a much frumpier pose. She's kind of poofing her tummy out. Her arms look like they're different lengths or something. She's got really long forearms. And then one shoulder's higher than the other, so she's kind of slouching over to the left. And her bottom is kind of hanging around this narrow stool. And then she could use some ankles as well. So I ended up coming up with this modification here, where her legs are slimmer, her hips are slimmer as well. Her arms are a little slimmer, tucked up a little bit too, so they don't look so ultra long. She's not slouching anymore, and her head is upright. So let's see how we might go about taking on a project like this. I'll go ahead and restore the original version of the image, and then I'll go up to the filter menu and choose the liquefy command. And by the way, even though liquefy is now the first command at the top of the filter menu, I do not recommend you press Control-Alt-F or Command-Option-F on the Mac in order to repeat the filter, because if you have the Alt or Option key down when you bring up liquefy, you turn off the graphics acceleration, and liquefy is going to work a lot more slowly. So go ahead and choose the standard command, and that will, as usual, bring up this liquefy window here. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on her arms. And I'll press the right bracket key a few times in order to increase the size of my brush. Notice, by the way, that I've got the warp tool selected. And I'm going to begin by dragging up on her elbows like so in order to move them to roughly the same height. Because right now it's like she's got gorilla arms or something. So I want to mitigate that a little bit. I'm also going to bring this shoulder down a little bit so that it matches the shoulder on the other side. And notice along the way here, I have managed, of course, to introduce new problems into the image. For example, her arm is now all sort of wiggly. So I'll go ahead and zoom in to 100%, try to take care of that by dragging up on the arm with the warp tool. And I might take up some of the details in her hips as well so that we can raise the arm that much more. If you wanted to slim the arms, by the way, great tool for this purpose is the push tool. So I'll go ahead and select that tool. And then I'm going to change the brush pressure to 10, and I'll reduce the size of my cursor a little bit, and I'll click right about there, and then shift-click down here. And what that does is it draws a straight line between the click and the shift-click points. And I'll do it again in order to make that arm increasingly slim like so. And then let's go ahead and replay the same thing over here on the right-hand side. This time I'll click at the bottom and shift-click at the top in order to scoot the arm in. And so that way I don't have to take advantage of that Alt key trick. And I might do that a few times in order to straighten things out. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the forearm. I'll click here and shift-click here in order to taper it up. I might click right about there and then shift-click at this location in order to take the bottom of the arm up a little bit as well. And now it looks like I've made this area a little bit too thin. That is, her wrist is now too thin. So I'll grab the warp tool, go ahead and scroll down a little bit, reduce the size of my cursor, and maybe take these details out just a little bit so that I'm widening her wrist. And I'm not getting anywhere, and that's because the brush pressure is so low. So I'll go ahead and reinstate that value to 100%. And now I'll drag down here. I'm going to zoom farther in. And one of the things you're going to notice when you zoom in on an image past 100%, at least I'm noticing it in this build, is that we are not seeing smooth results. We're seeing all these jagged results all over the place. Those aren't really there. If you zoom back out to 100%, you'll see those weird transitions disappear. Just a function of being zoomed in past 100%. And this is actually a new phenomenon. I haven't seen this in liquefy before, but it's just something to be aware of. I'm now going to grab that push tool. Let me see if I click here and shift click here. Oh, nope, going the wrong direction. And besides, I've got the brush pressure set too high. All right, now I'll click there and shift click there in order to nudge that wrist farther outward. We don't want our arm to look too emaciated. And that's starting to look pretty darn good, I think. I might go ahead and grab my warp tool again and increase the size of the cursor a little bit and shove that shoulder out once again after reinstating a brush pressure of 100. And that way I can go ahead and give her more of a shoulder. And by the way, this image is pretty forgiving because it's set against a white background, and that means we can stretch the white background into the image, into her shoulder, for example, without stretching any of the background because there really is no background. It's just white. All right, now I'll reduce the size of my cursor and drag down like so on the sleeve so that we're straightening the sleeve a little bit so it doesn't look so bunched up. All right, now let's take on her hips. And I'm going to increase the size of my cursor quite a bit here and then just go ahead and lift those hips upward. Maybe reduce the size of the cursor, lift that as well, tuck this side in. Again, you don't want to go too far with it. She should still have hips after we're done, but we just don't want that appearance like she's hanging off the edge of the stool because that's not going to be a particularly attractive shot for anybody. I don't think any of our bottoms are going to survive that. Anyway, I'll go ahead and tuck this up some more. And you can see that it's just amazing. This would take you months of work in a gym in order to achieve these kinds of results. And even though it does take a little bit of work inside the liquefy filter, it's nowhere near as much effort as actually exercising. So, all right, now what I want to do is tuck in her tummy. And I think the best approach here is going to be to mask those arms. Because if I just start working on her stomach, I'll show you. I'll go ahead and grab the pucker tool, which is pretty great for this purpose. And I'll increase the heck out of the size of my cursor, and I'll just kind of click there. And you notice we're, taking off pounds in just a few seconds. But I'm also running a risk of harming the arm. And let me see if I did. I kind of did a number on this left-hand arm, which might, not be the biggest problem on earth. But the more work I do on the torso here, the more it's going to come at the expense of the arms. So you can mask them. I'll go ahead and backstep by pressing Control-Alt-Z or Command-Option-Z a couple of times. By grabbing this freeze mask tool, that means your masking area is away. And then I would reduce the size of my cursor like so and paint over the arms, paint into the upper arms as well. Looks like I added a little bit of auto scroll there, but that's okay. And I'll paint over the hands to make sure they're protected. Notice that I'm going a little bit beyond the hands because otherwise the flesh tones there are going to get stretched into the area that I'm trying to pucker, that is the torso area. So you want to mask too much as opposed to too little. And then go ahead and grab that pucker tool again, and let's see if we can do some fairly low impact modifications here. I don't want to click and hold as long as I was before. That was just to demonstrate a point. I just want to be able to slim things a little bit here and there. Now, at this point, and make sure that you don't have any arm creeping into the torso area, because that's what can happen. Then when you get to a point that you're comfortable, then go ahead and click the None button in order to turn that mask off. And now we need to use the Warp tool with a smaller cursor in order to tuck these details up. And I'll just drag along the arm so that I can move the fabric of the pants into the arm region like so. And that's going to help create the impression that she's got a little less of a tummy and there's more pant action going on. And now I need to zoom in to this jagged 200% zoom ratio here and adjust these details a little bit more. Maybe take this up the arm again. The unfortunate thing is that I'm kind of messing up the flower pattern in her shirt, but hopefully we can make up for that over time. And I'll go ahead and adjust this edge in as well. Maybe reduce the size of my cursor and try dragging up a little bit here and see what I end up getting. All right, now let's zoom out and see what we've managed to do. Looks like I've got a pretty big mush right there in that detail. Fabric can be very unforgiving, by the way, especially patterns in fabric. So it's the kind of stuff you got to watch out for. And it's also the kind of stuff that may take some effort in terms of you sort of going back and forth with the warp tool and so forth. All right, I think this arm could use a little additional warping back this direction so that we're kind of smoothing it out. And that looks pretty good for now. So I'm going to go ahead and save off a mesh by clicking on the Save Mesh button. And I will call this Phase 1. And then I'll click the Save button in order to save off that file. And finally, I'll click OK in order to apply my change. So just to give you a sense of what we've done here, I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac. That's the before version of the image. And now, if I press Control or Command-Z again, that's the after version. Much slimmer hips, raised arms, things are looking pretty good. In the next movie, we'll make some additional modifications to the fabric, and we'll also take on the model's legs.